to say, but the silence of choosing not to fill every moment with words. And I've noticed throughout my life that these silent people, these observers who speak sparingly, they see things that escape those of us who are constantly chattering away. Now, our society has a rather peculiar relationship with silence. We're terrified of it. We fill every gap in conversation with nervous laughter or meaningless pleasantries. We turn on the radio the moment we get in the car. We need the television muttering in the background even when we're not watching it. Silence, it seems, has become almost unbearable to us. And I think this tells us something very important about what we're afraid of. The constant talker, you see, is running away from something. They're running away from the present moment, from direct experience, from what actually is. Because when you're constantly talking, constantly explaining, constantly interpreting everything through words, you're not actually experiencing reality. You're experiencing your thoughts about reality, your words about reality, your concepts about reality. But reality itself slips through your fingers like water. Let me give you an example. Two people are walking through a forest. One of them is talking continuously, pointing out this tree and that bird, commenting on the weather, telling stories about other forests they've visited, making plans about where they'll walk next. The other person is silent, simply walking, simply seeing, simply being there. Now, who do you think is actually experiencing the forest? Who is present to the rustle of leaves, the quality of light filtering through branches, the particular smell of earth and growing things? The silent one, of course. The talker is lost in their own verbal world, barely noticing the forest at all. This is what silent people see, that talkers cannot. They see what's actually here, rather than their ideas about what's here. They experience life directly, rather than through the filter of constant commentary. And this is no small thing. In fact, it's perhaps the most important thing there is. You see, most of us live almost entirely in our heads. We have a running commentary going on all the time, interpreting everything, judging everything, categorizing everything. We see a flower, and immediately we're thinking, oh, that's a rose. I prefer daisies. I should plant some flowers in my garden. I wonder if that garden center is still open. I need to remember to call them tomorrow. And on and on. We never actually see the flower. We see our thoughts about the flower, but the silent person sees the flower. Not the word flower, not the concept of flower, not their memories of other flowers or their plans for future flowers. Just this flower, here, now, in all its particular detail and presence. This is a completely different order of experience. Now, I'm not saying that words and thinking and talking are bad. Obviously not. I'm using words right now to communicate with you. Language is a magnificent tool. It allows us to share our experiences, to coordinate our actions, to build civilizations. But like any tool, it can be misused. And when we mistake the tool for reality itself, when we confuse the menu for the meal, we get into trouble. The problem with constant talking is that it keeps you at a remove from life. You're always one step back, commenting on things rather than experiencing them. It's like watching life through a window rather than being in it. And the tragedy is that most people live their entire lives this way. They never actually touch reality. They live in a world of words, of concepts, of second-hand experiences. Silent people have discovered something that talkers haven't. They've discovered that there's a way of knowing that doesn't depend on words, a way of experiencing that's deeper than thought. When you're silent, really silent, not just outwardly but inwardly, something remarkable happens. The barrier between you and the world dissolves. You stop being an observer looking at life from the outside, and you become life itself looking out from the inside. This is what the mystics have been trying to tell us for thousands of years. That the truth cannot be spoken, that reality cannot be captured in words. The Taoists say that the Tao that can be named is not the eternal Tao. The Buddhists speak of the silence beyond words. Even in Christianity, There's this understanding that in the beginning was the Word, but before the Word, what? Silence, mystery, the unnameable source of all things. But you don't have to become a mystic to understand this. You've all experienced it in small ways. Have you ever had a moment when you were so completely absorbed in something that you forgot yourself? Perhaps watching a sunset, or listening to music, or making love, or playing with a child? In those moments, where is the commentary? Where is the constant stream of words? It's gone. And in its absence, there's a kind of clarity, a kind of presence, a kind of aliveness that's quite extraordinary. Silent people live closer to this state than talkers do, not because they've achieved some special spiritual attainment, but simply because they've learned to shut up. They've learned that words are not necessary for every moment, that observation doesn't require commentary, that experience doesn't need to be immediately translated into language. And because they're not constantly talking, they notice things. They notice the subtle shifts in a person's expression that reveal what they're really feeling beneath their words. They notice the quality of light at different times of day. They notice patterns in nature, in human behavior, in the way things unfold. They see connections that escape the talker because the talker is too busy talking to pay attention. There's a wonderful story from Zen Buddhism about two monks walking together. After hours of walking in silence, the younger monk finally speaks. "Master," he says, "I have been practicing silence as you taught me, but I find it very difficult. My mind is full of words, even when I don't speak them." The older monk picks up a stone and throws it into a pond. "Do you hear that?" he asks. "Yes, master," says the younger monk. "Then you know the sound of words," says the master. "Now hear the sound before the stone hits the water." The younger monk stands perplexed, and the master says, "That is the sound of silence. It's not the absence of sound. It's what's there before sound arises." This is a profound teaching. Silence isn't just the absence of words. It's a positive presence, a living awareness that exists before words, beneath words, beyond words. The silent person has access to this awareness in a way the constant talker does not. Now, let me be clear about something. I'm not advocating that everyone should stop talking and become mute. That would be absurd. Communication is important. Sharing ideas is valuable. The question is not whether to talk, but whether you can be silent, whether you have the capacity to be present without words, whether you know how to simply be without constantly doing something with your mind. Most people, if they're honest with themselves, will find this very difficult. Try it right now. Try to simply be aware without thinking about what you're aware of, without labeling it, without commenting on it, without judging it. Just pure awareness, without words. Can you do it? Most people can't sustain it for more than a few seconds before the internal chatter starts up again. This is what I mean by saying we live in our heads. We're addicted to thinking, addicted to words, addicted to the constant stream of mental commentary. And this addiction prevents us from experiencing the fullness of life. We live in a thin, abstract world of concepts and ideas, missing the rich, immediate, sensory reality that's always present but rarely noticed. Silent people have broken this addiction, or at least loosened its grip. They've discovered that you don't need to think about every experience to have it. In fact, thinking about it often diminishes it. When you're watching a beautiful sunset and thinking, "This is a beautiful sunset, I should remember this. I wish I had my camera. This reminds me of that sunset I saw in Greece." You're not actually watching the sunset. You're watching your thoughts about the sunset. But if you can just be silent and watch, without all that mental noise, the sunset reveals itself in a way it never could otherwise. This is true of everything. Relationships become deeper when you can simply be with another person without always needing to fill the silence. Work becomes more satisfying when you can be fully present to what you're doing rather than constantly thinking about other things. Even simple activities like eating or walking become rich experiences when you do them with attention rather than on autopilot while your mind chatters away. The talker misses all of this. They're so busy talking, either outwardly or inwardly, that life passes them by. They live on the surface of things, never penetrating to the depth. They skim along the top of experience like a water bug, never diving below to see what's there. And here's something else that silent people see. They see that most of what people say is not really communication at all. It's noise. It's filling space. It's avoiding discomfort. It's trying to impress or persuade or manipulate. It's defending a position or building up an image. Very rarely is it genuine communication, genuine sharing of what is. When you are silent more often, when you speak less, you begin to notice this. You notice how much of conversation is just people taking turns delivering their prepared monologues, not really listening to each other, just waiting for their chance to talk. You notice how people use words to hide rather than reveal. You notice how language can be a wall between people rather than a bridge. And you also notice something interesting. When you speak less, your words have more impact. There's a reason why the strong silent type is such a compelling archetype. It's because when such a person finally does speak, people listen. Their words carry weight because they're not drowned in a flood of meaningless chatter. They've been distilled, concentrated, made essential. I think of the great teachers throughout history, and many of them were notable for their silence as much as for their words. Buddha sat in silence under the Bodhi tree. Jesus went into the wilderness alone. Muhammad retreated to a cave. The great mystics and sages have always understood that wisdom doesn't come from more talking, but from learning to be quiet enough to hear what's already there. There's a difference, you see, between knowledge and wisdom. Knowledge is about accumulation. You gather information, you learn facts, you study systems and theories, but wisdom is about subtraction. It's about stripping away all the unnecessary mental noise until you can perceive clearly. And you can't do that while you're constantly talking, because talking is a form of doing, a form of activity, and wisdom requires a certain quality of receptivity, of openness, of allowing rather than forcing. The silent person is receptive in a way the talker is not. They can hear what life is trying to tell them. They can sense the undercurrents in a situation that the talker misses because the talker is too busy broadcasting to receive. It's like the difference between a radio that's always transmitting and one that's tuned to receive. The silent person's antenna is up, picking up signals that the talker's noise drowns out. Now, I want to address something that might be troubling some of you. You might be thinking, but I enjoy talking, I like sharing ideas and having conversations. Are you saying there's something wrong with that? And the answer is no, not at all. There's nothing wrong with genuine conversation, with real exchange of ideas and experiences. What I'm talking about is something else entirely. I'm talking about compulsive talking, neurotic talking, talking as a way of avoiding rather than engaging. You can tell the difference quite easily. After a genuine conversation, you feel enlivened, nourished, connected. After compulsive talking, you feel drained, scattered, more alone than before. One is communion, the other is just noise. One comes from presence, the other from absence. One is communication, the other is simply two monologues taking turns. Silent people know this difference intuitively. They don't waste energy on empty chatter. They save their words for when they have something real to communicate. And because they've spent time in silence, when they do speak, what comes out is more likely to be genuine, considered, meaningful. There's also this to consider. In silence, you encounter yourself in a way that constant talking prevents. When you're always talking, always engaged with external things, you can avoid looking at what's going on inside. But in silence, you have to face yourself. Your fears, your desires, your contradictions, your truth. This can be uncomfortable, which is why many people avoid it. But it's also where growth happens, where transformation occurs. The silent person has done this inner work. They've sat with themselves in silence and faced what's there. They've seen their own mind at work with all its tricks and evasions and patterns, and this gives them a certain quality of presence, a certain authenticity that the constant talker lacks. Let me tell you about a man I knew years ago. He was a professor, brilliant, articulate, always ready with an insightful comment or a clever observation. Everyone admired his intellect, his verbal facility. But I noticed something about him. He couldn't be alone. He always needed to be around people, always needed to be talking. And when he wasn't talking, he was reading or listening to music or doing something to keep his mind occupied. One day I asked him why he never simply sat quietly. He looked at me as if I'd suggested something bizarre. What would be the point of that, he asked. What would I do? And I realized that for him, being was not enough. He had to be constantly doing something with his mind. The idea of just existing without any mental activity was alien to him. Years later, I heard that he'd had some kind of breakdown. The details were vague, but it seemed that his constant mental activity had finally exhausted him. He'd burned himself out. And in that burnout, he was forced into silence, whether he liked it or not. And apparently it transformed him. When I saw him again, he was a different person, quieter, calmer, more present. He told me that the silence he'd been forced into had shown him something he'd spent his whole life running away from, himself. This is what silence does. It reveals what's actually there, beneath all the noise and busyness and constant doing. And what's there is simply this: awareness itself, consciousness itself, life itself. Not your ideas about life, not your plans and worries and interpretations, but the raw, immediate, living reality of existence. Silent people have access to this. They know it intimately. They live from this ground of being rather than from the surface level of thoughts and words. And this changes everything. It changes how they see the world, how they relate to others, how they respond to circumstances. They have a kind of stability, a groundedness, that the talker lacks, because the talker is living on the shifting sand of concepts and opinions, rather than on the solid ground of direct experience. There's a paradox here, though. The silent person often understands language better than the talker does, because they don't use words carelessly. They appreciate their power and their limitations. They know that words can point to truth, but can never be truth itself. They know that the word water doesn't quench thirst, that the word fire doesn't burn. They understand that all language is metaphor, all concepts are approximations, all theories are maps and not the territory. The talker, on the other hand, often confuses the map for the territory. They live in a world of abstractions, thinking that if they can describe something accurately enough, explain it thoroughly enough, categorize it precisely enough, they've somehow captured it. But you can't capture life in words any more than you can capture the ocean in a bucket. You might get a sample, but you've lost the essential nature of the thing. So what are we to do with all this? How do we cultivate this capacity for silence, for direct seeing, for unmediated experience? Well, you can't really cultivate it in the usual sense, because cultivating implies doing, and what we're talking about is actually a kind of not doing. But you can create conditions that allow it to happen. You can practice simply being quiet sometimes, not forcing silence, but allowing it, sitting without reaching for a book or turning on the radio, walking without immediately pulling out a device, being with another person without feeling the need to fill every pause with words. These small acts of allowing silence create space for something else to emerge. And you can start noticing your own internal chatter, just noticing it, without trying to stop it, becoming aware of how constantly your mind is talking to itself, commenting, judging, planning, remembering. You don't have to do anything about it, Just notice it. Just see it happening. This noticing itself creates a little space, a little gap in the constant stream of thought. And in that gap, something else becomes possible. What silent people see that talkers cannot is ultimately very simple. They see what is, not what they think about what is, not what they wish were,